You may have spent your life chasing understanding, seeking explanations, clinging to responses that never came. And yet, the truth is often found not in the words spoken, but in the silence that follows. There comes a moment when the super empath, the one who feels the deepest, the one who gives without hesitation, chooses not to explain. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of sacred wisdom. For in silence there is power, and in absence there is awakening. The avoidant will feel it first as discomfort, a subtle unrest, a quiet panic. They will reach, they will question, they will search for what once flowed freely to them. But what they encounter is not withdrawal born of cruelty. It is a mirror reflecting their own avoidance, their own inability to fully engage with the depth of love offered to them. Silence becomes the teacher that speaks louder than any words ever could. And this is the divine principle. At work, compassion does not demand endless pursuit. Love is not measured by how long you chase, but by how clearly you honor your own truth. When the super empath steps back, boundaries become sacred, and the avoidant is confronted with the void they have skirted all along. This is not punishment. It is a call to awakening, an invitation to meet themselves in the stillness. Do not mistake silence for weakness. It is the ultimate strength. It teaches patience, accountability, and the beauty of self-discovery. It demonstrates that growth cannot be forced, that transformation cannot be gifted. It must be chosen. And in this sacred pause, the avoidant has the opportunity to finally feel, to finally reckon, to finally awaken to the consequences of their emotional evasion. To the super empath who chooses silence, know that you are not abandoning, you are empowering. You are honoring the divine rhythm of cause and effect, the sacred law of love, and the truth that all souls must meet themselves before they can meet another. Your quiet holds a universe of lessons, a symphony of insight, a profound invitation for the avoidant to rise from their shadow and embrace the fullness of their own heart. In the end, silence is not absence, it is presence in its highest form. It is the teacher who never speaks yet says everything, and for those willing to receive, it is the final transformative lesson, a lesson that will awaken not only the avoidant, but all who witness the sacred strength of love held in stillness. Silence is one of the most misunderstood tools in the realm of human connection. For many, it appears as absence, indifference, or even rejection. Yet, for the super empath, silence is not a void, it is a mirror. It reflects the true nature of those around them, revealing layers of emotions, intentions, and patterns that words often fail to expose. When a super empath steps into silence, it is not a retreat born of fear or anger, but a deliberate act of divine clarity. It is the conscious decision to stop chasing, to stop explaining, and to allow the world, particularly the avoidant, to face the reflection of their own emotional state. In this stillness, every unspoken word becomes a magnifying glass over the avoidant's hidden fears, their avoidance, and their habitual deflection of intimacy. The power of silence lies in its ability to strip away illusions. Words can comfort, distract, or even manipulate. They can mask avoidance with charm, excuses, or empty promises. But silence does not lie. Silence exposes the subtle truths that otherwise remain hidden behind layers of defense. The avoidant, who has long relied on distance, deflection, and emotional unavailability, encounters a reality they cannot negotiate or control. For the first time, they are faced with the reflection of their own patterns without the distraction of external input. In the absence of explanation, there is no script to follow, no role to perform. The mirror is clear and the reflection is undeniable. Moreover, silence as a mirror allows the super empath to reclaim their own energy. In relationships with avoidance, super empaths often find themselves giving endlessly, explaining repeatedly, and trying tirelessly to bridge a gap that cannot be crossed through words alone. Silence is the sacred boundary that restores their power, showing that love is not about submission or endless pursuit, but about conscious presence. When the empath no longer provides constant feedback, when they stop offering explanations or seeking to fix what cannot be fixed for another, the avoidant is forced to confront the emptiness left by their own avoidance. This confrontation is often uncomfortable, even painful, but it is necessary. Pain, when encountered with honesty, is a catalyst for growth. Silence also encourages introspection. When the super empath withdraws into quiet, it is not a denial of love, but an invitation for the avoidant to look inward. In the absence of external validation, they are confronted with the echoes of their own choices, the weight of their emotional evasion, and the clarity of what has been missing in their engagement. The mirror of silence does not shame, it illuminates. It allows the avoidant to see the contrast between genuine connection and the hollow patterns they have relied on. The reflection may provoke discomfort, but it also holds the potential for awakening. In this sacred stillness, the empath teaches without speaking. The avoidant learns without instruction. The mirror of silence communicates the divine principle that emotional presence cannot be manufactured, coerced, or explained away. It demands authenticity, accountability, and awareness. And while the super empath may seem absent, they are in truth profoundly present in their silence, observing, witnessing, and offering the ultimate form of compassion, the opportunity for the other to meet themselves fully. Silence, then, is more than a pause. It is a reflection of truth, a confrontation with reality, and a sacred act of teaching. The avoidant cannot escape the mirror, for it is not imposed but revealed. And for the super empath, this act of reflection is an expression of the highest love, one that does not chase, does not explain unnecessarily, but allows truth to stand on its own, shining with clarity, demanding acknowledgement, and offering transformation. There is a profound power in non-reaction, a strength that few truly understand and even fewer are willing to practice. For the super empath, non-reaction is not indifference, nor is it coldness. It is the conscious choice to step back from the impulse to respond, to fix, to justify, or to placate. It is the embodiment of a principle that goes beyond emotional intelligence. It is divine wisdom in action. When faced with the avoidant, whose patterns are often rooted in fear, withdrawal, or self-protection, the super empath discovers that their natural impulse to respond to every emotional cue can unintentionally reinforce avoidance. By not reacting, by holding space in silence, the empath creates a mirror of presence that is at once firm and compassionate, allowing the avoidant to confront the reality of their own behaviors. Non-reaction is transformative because it communicates clarity without a single word. It says, I am here, but I am not at your mercy. I will not diminish my energy to accommodate avoidance, and I will not chase what is not offered freely. This is a lesson that cannot be taught through dialogue, reasoning, or argument. The avoidant may try to provoke, manipulate, or elicit a response, but the non-reaction of the super empath dissolves the scripts that the avoidant has relied upon. When nothing is met with reaction, the avoidant is forced to face themselves, their discomfort, and their unresolved patterns. Non-reaction exposes the hidden truths that words often conceal, the gaps in emotional presence, the boundaries that have been ignored, and the love that has been taken for granted. In non-reaction, there is also a sacred form of protection. The super empath's energy is their life force, and to react impulsively to avoidance is to sacrifice that force in service of patterns that cannot sustain genuine connection. Non-reaction becomes a shield that preserves integrity while still holding space for growth. It is a principle rooted in self-respect, in the understanding that love does not require exhaustion, justification, or compromise of one's own essence. By remaining steady, calm, and unprovoked, the empath demonstrates a power that is not loud or aggressive, but quietly undeniable. It is a presence that refuses to be diminished, a lesson that refuses to be explained away. Moreover, non-reaction creates a sacred pause in the flow of energy between the empath and the avoidant. It allows the avoidant to sit with the emptiness that their avoidance creates, without interference, without soothing, without distraction. In this pause, they encounter the truth of their own limitations and the reflection of the love that was once freely given but is now held in quiet dignity. The empath's non-reaction communicates that love is not a tool to manipulate or control, that energy cannot be extracted endlessly without reciprocity, and that accountability is a necessary element of any authentic connection. Non-reaction also fosters inner mastery for the super empath. By practicing restraint, by resisting the impulse to explain, defend, or argue, the empath deepens their understanding of divine timing, spiritual alignment, and the law of cause and effect. They learn that energy flows according to universal principles. When they overextend themselves, they reinforce avoidance. When they hold steady, they illuminate truth. Non-reaction is, therefore, both a weapon and a gift. It cuts through illusions while offering the avoidant the possibility of authentic self-reflection. Ultimately, the power of non-reaction is not a denial of love. It is the highest expression of it. It demonstrates that compassion does not require submission, that presence does not demand exhaustion, and that the super empath's love is not conditional upon the behaviors of another. Through non-reaction, the empath teaches a lesson that words cannot convey, that true strength lies in restraint, that sacred boundaries are essential, and that love, when held in conscious stillness, has the power to transform not only the avoidant, but the very dynamic of the relationship itself. Loss is often feared, resisted, or misunderstood. We perceive it as an ending, a void, something that diminishes us. Yet, for the super empath, loss is a sacred teacher, a doorway into awakening. When the super empath chooses silence with the avoidant, they are not withdrawing out of cruelty or anger, but as a deliberate act of divine guidance. In that absence, the avoidant experiences a void they cannot control, a space in which their patterns of avoidance, distraction, or emotional detachment are laid bare. Loss, in this context, becomes the most profound mirror, reflecting not only the consequences of their behaviors, but also the deeper truths about their own readiness, or lack thereof, to engage fully in connection. The awakening that emerges from loss is not immediate comfort. It is discomfort. It is a tension that cannot be escaped through charm, manipulation, or avoidance. The avoidant, accustomed to having the super empath's energy, attention, and compassion as a constant, now encounters silence as the only constant. This absence forces them to reckon with their own choices, the ways they have skirted intimacy, avoided vulnerability, and relied on emotional withdrawal as a shield. In the stillness created by the super empath's quiet, the avoidant is faced with the reality that the love they once took for granted is no longer unconditionally available. Loss, in this sense, becomes the catalyst for self-reflection. It is the quiet, undeniable teacher of responsibility, awareness, and transformation. The super empath understands that this awakening through loss is not about punishment. It is about alignment with truth, with boundaries, and with the natural flow of energy in relationships. Love cannot be forced into a person who refuses to meet it with authenticity, and explanations often fail to reach those who are not ready to see. By withdrawing, by embracing silence, the empath creates a sacred space where the avoidant is confronted with the emptiness left by their own patterns. In this absence, they must either awaken to the depth of their avoidance or continue in a cycle of disconnection. The loss they feel is not merely the absence of the empath, it is the reflection of their own inner resistance to vulnerability. This form of awakening is also deeply spiritual. It demonstrates the principle that transformation cannot be rushed or manufactured. Just as the earth needs the stillness of winter to prepare for spring, the soul requires the emptiness of absence to recognize its own needs, desires, and limitations. The super empath's silence acts as the winter for the avoidant soul, creating a pause, a sacred space for reflection, and a confrontation with reality that cannot be ignored. In that loss, the avoidant is given the opportunity to awaken, not because they are coerced, but because absence reveals what was previously unseen, unacknowledged, or dismissed. Loss also illuminates the value of the empath's energy. When the avoidant experiences the absence of consistent attention and compassion, they encounter the truth that love, when freely given, is a sacred force that cannot be wasted. The loss makes visible what the avoidant has ignored: the depth, the consistency, and the unwavering presence of the super empath. It awakens awareness of what was once taken for granted and the realization that such love is not infinite, not something to be extracted at will. Through this process, the super empath teaches indirectly but profoundly. Words are unnecessary because the lesson is lived and felt. The avoidant learns that love cannot be a tool to control or manipulate. Loss becomes the doorway through which growth, accountability, and authentic engagement must pass. The absence of explanation, the deliberate choice of silence, and the withdrawal of constant emotional labor form a sacred curriculum, one that awakens the avoidant to the consequences of their avoidance and the reality of connection as a mutual exchange of energy, attention, and presence. Ultimately, awakening through loss is a divine principle in action. It is the recognition that absence, when wielded with wisdom, compassion, and integrity, becomes a powerful teacher. It strips away illusions, confronts avoidance, and opens a path for self-realization. In the quiet of the super empath's silence, the avoidant faces the truth of their own hearts. And it is here, in this sacred space of loss, that awakening begins. Empathy is a gift, a sacred capacity to feel deeply, to resonate with the emotions of others, and to offer compassion in its purest form. Yet, for the super empath, there is a fine line between genuine empathy and unintentional enablement. True empathy does not mean that one must carry the weight of another's avoidance, fear, or denial. It does not demand endless explanations, repeated chasing, or the sacrifice of one's own emotional integrity. To empathize without enabling is to honor the divine balance between giving and allowing, between love and discernment. When a super empath practices silence, they embody this principle in its highest form. They are present without enabling avoidance, compassionate without sacrificing self-respect, and loving without losing themselves in the patterns of those who cannot yet fully receive love. Enablement is subtle, often cloaked in the language of care. It appears when repeated forgiveness, constant explanation, or endless reassurance allows avoidance to continue unchecked. The avoidant may become accustomed to a cycle where they are never fully held accountable, never fully confronted with the consequences of emotional withdrawal, and never invited to meet the depth of connection they avoid. In this cycle, empathy becomes a tool of sustenance for avoidance rather than a bridge to awareness. The super empath's silence interrupts this pattern. It is a deliberate act that communicates love is not a tool for manipulation. Compassion is not a license for evasion, and presence does not require self-erasure. Empathy without enablement is about holding sacred boundaries. It is about understanding that one's energy, attention, and emotional labor are finite and sacred. When the super empath chooses silence instead of explanation, they create a space where the avoidant must confront the reality of their actions. Absence, in this sense, is not punishment but education. It allows the avoidant to feel the weight of their own choices, the impact of avoidance, and the depth of connection they have been unable to fully embrace. This is the essence of true compassion: to care enough to stop giving when giving perpetuates avoidance and to create space for authentic growth. The act of empathy without enablement also fosters personal empowerment. For the super empath, it is an acknowledgement that their energy is sacred and must be conserved. By stepping into silence, they reclaim their emotional sovereignty, demonstrating that love is not about control, but about alignment with truth. The avoidant learns, indirectly but profoundly, that connection cannot exist without mutual presence and accountability. They are confronted with the reality that love, when given without discernment, can be wasted, but love, when held with integrity, carries transformative power. This practice also communicates a higher PR. Insightful that emotional growth must be chosen, not coerced. The avoidant cannot evolve through endless explanations or repeated forgiveness. They awaken when they are confronted with the absence of what they have taken for granted. Silence becomes a teacher, that conveys more than words ever could. The super empath, in refraining from enabling, demonstrates that true connection requires both presence and responsibility, that compassion is not an invitation to manipulate, and that love is not synonymous with sacrifice to the point of self-erasure. Moreover, empathy without enablement nurtures a deeper understanding of divine timing. The super empath recognizes that some lessons must be learned in the stillness of absence, that growth cannot be forced, and that avoidance can only be addressed when the individual is ready to face themselves fully. The silence of the empath becomes a sacred reflection, offering the avoidant a chance to encounter their own patterns without interference, to feel the consequences of avoidance, and to confront the emotional gaps they have ignored. Ultimately, empathy without enablement is the highest form of love in action. It is love that does not chase, explain, or rescue unnecessarily. It is love that holds space while demanding authenticity, presence while honoring boundaries, and compassion while fostering accountability. Through silence, the super empath teaches the avoidant, and by extension the world, that true empathy is not about perpetuate avoidance, but about catalyzing growth, awakening, and conscious connection. It is a love that transforms not by reaction, but by presence in its purest, most discerning, and most sacred form. Divine timing is a principle that few truly grasp, yet it governs every authentic connection, every moment of growth, and every awakening of the soul. For the super empath, patience is not a passive state. It is a conscious alignment with the rhythms of life, the sacred flow of energy, and the unfolding of truth. When a super empath chooses silence in response to the avoidant, they are not acting out of frustration or withdrawal. They are embodying a principle far greater than immediate satisfaction or reaction. They are honoring the law of divine timing, understanding that transformation cannot be rushed, that awareness cannot be forced, and that the avoidant must meet their own reflection in the stillness before true connection can occur. Patience in this context is not about waiting with hope alone. It is an active, deliberate state of being. It is a recognition that every soul has its own pace, its own thresholds, and its own path toward emotional maturity. The super empath, in embracing silence, creates a sacred space where the avoidant encounters the full weight of their patterns without interference, without justification, and without distraction. This sacred pause is not a void, but a vessel holding the potential for awakening, accountability, and transformation. It is a rem into that growth must be self-initiated. It cannot be manufactured by explanation, persuasion, or endless chasing. Divine timing also teaches the empath about the limits of their own energy and the necessity of sacred boundaries. Love is not a tool for coercion, and patience is not permission for repeated avoidance. The super empath understands that their energy is finite, that their presence carries power, and that their silence is an expression of both love and discernment. In stepping back, they allow the avoidant to feel the absence of what was once freely given, a space that awakens consciousness more profoundly than any argument or discussion could. This patience is a form of strength, a demonstration that love is most powerful when it is both present and measured, abundant yet discerning, compassionate yet unwavering. Furthermore, the practice of divine timing cultivates trust in the natural order of life. The super empath recognizes that forcing understanding or reaction from the avoidant only perpetuates resistance and avoidance. True transformation arises when the individual is ready to confront their own behaviors, when the lessons of absence and reflection resonate with their inner truth. Silence, held patiently, becomes a teacher that communicates far more than words ever could. It embodies the principle that timing is sacred, that each person's journey is unique, and that growth must unfold in alignment with divine rhythm rather than human expectation. This patience also allows the empath to witness the avoidance awakening with clarity and grace. By not reacting to attempts at manipulation, emotional testing, or avoidance, the empath maintains their own integrity while providing the conditions necessary for authentic reflection. The avoidant begins to feel the consequences of their actions without judgment imposed externally. They encounter their own discomfort, recognize the patterns they have relied upon, and face the gaps between avoidance and connection. Through the empath's stillness, they are given an opportunity to meet themselves fully at their own pace in the sacred space created by absence. Divine timing is ultimately a practice of faith in the unseen, a recognition that the universe orchestrates every lesson, every boundary, and every moment of realization. The super empath, in choosing silence, embodies this faith. They understand that forcing interaction or explanation would undermine the natural unfolding of awareness. Instead, they trust that their quiet presence, held with patience and purpose, will catalyze awakening at the precise moment it is meant to occur. It is a profound form of love, measured, intentional, and aligned with the highest principles of growth and transformation. Through silence and patience, the super empath teaches the avoidant that connection cannot be manufactured, that awareness cannot be imposed, and that transformation cannot be rushed. Divine timing ensures that lessons are received. When the soul is ready, that growth arises from reflection rather than coercion, and that love, held with discernment, carries the power to transform both hearts and consciousness. In this sacred practice, patience is not passive. It is an act of wisdom, an embodiment of divine law, and a profound catalyst for awakening. Some of the most profound lessons in life are never spoken. They are not delivered through lectures, arguments, or repeated explanations. They arrive quietly, subtly, and invisibly, often through absence, stillness, and deliberate silence. For the super empath, the invisible teacher is a sacred principle. It is the recognition that true transformation does not always come from words, but from reflection, confrontation with reality, and the unspoken truths that life presents. When the super empath chooses silence with the avoidant, they step into this role without even trying. Their silence becomes a curriculum of self-awareness, accountability, and growth, teaching lessons that the avoidant cannot ignore, even if they do not yet fully understand. The invisible teacher operates on the principle that presence without interference often speaks louder than any explanation. The avoidant, accustomed to emotional pursuit and reassurance, is suddenly confronted with the absence of constant validation. This absence becomes a mirror, reflecting their own behaviors, their patterns of avoidance, and their resistance to vulnerability. The lesson is not delivered through judgment or criticism. It is experienced viscerally. The avoidant begins to feel the impact of their avoidance, the weight of unreciprocated energy, and the reality that connection requires effort, presence, and authentic engagement. The super empath's silence allows this teaching to occur organically, without coercion, manipulation, or pressure. The power of the invisible teacher lies in its subtlety. It does not demand compliance, nor does it seek immediate acknowledgement. It trusts in the principle that lessons, when encountered at the right time and with openness, can penetrate the deepest parts of the psyche. The avoidant may initially resist, dismiss, or rationalize the absence, but the lesson persists quietly, like an undercurrent shaping thought, reflection, and emotional awareness. In this way, the invisible teacher teaches patience, self-reflection, and responsibility. It shows that love is not a transaction, that presence cannot be taken for granted, and that avoidance has consequences that are unavoidable, even when unspoken. For the super empath, being the invisible teacher is an act of sacred discipline. It requires restraint, discernment, and unwavering alignment with personal boundaries and values. It is not easy to withhold explanation when one feels deeply, to resist the urge to chase, or to watch the avoidant struggle in the space created by silence. Yet in doing so, the empath demonstrates the highest form of compassion, love that holds space without manipulation, presence without depletion, and guidance without force. Their silence becomes a vessel for growth, allowing the avoidant to meet themselves fully and experience the truths that cannot be taught through words alone. The invisible teacher also illuminates a spiritual principle that awareness and transformation must emerge from within. The avoidant cannot be taught through reasoning alone. They must experience, feel, and reflect. The empath's silence is a sacred framework for this internal awakening. It encourages self-inquiry, emotional accountability, and the courage to confront patterns that have long been ignored. In essence, the invisible teacher allows the avoidant to encounter the consequences of their choices, feel the depth of their own avoidance, and recognize the potential for authentic connection if they are willing to engage fully. Ultimately, the invisible teacher is a reflection of divine wisdom. It demonstrates that the most profound lessons often arrive through quiet presence, absence, and restraint. It teaches without words, corrects without confrontation, and transforms without force. Through silence, the super empath becomes both guardian and guide, providing the conditions necessary for awakening while preserving their own energy, integrity, and peace. The avoidant, confronted with the invisible teacher, is challenged to rise above avoidance, face their own truths, and embrace the possibility of authentic emotional engagement. In this sacred dance of stillness and reflection, the invisible teacher becomes one of the most powerful catalysts for growth, transformation, and conscious connection that life can offer. Detachment is often misunderstood. Many perceive it as coldness, indifference, or a lack of care. Yet, for the super empath, detachment is the highest form of love and the ultimate expression of wisdom. It is not the rejection of connection, but the conscious release of the need to control outcomes, explain endlessly, or chase after those who are not ready to receive fully. Freedom through detachment arises when the empath honors their own boundaries, preserves their energy, and trusts the natural flow of life. By choosing silence and stepping back from the avoidant, the super empath demonstrates that true love is not dependent on reaction or reciprocation. It exists independently, sacredly, and with divine integrity, creating space for growth, awakening, and transformation. Detachment allows the super empath to reclaim their power. In relationships with avoidance, there is often an invisible drain, a constant pull to fill emotional gaps, clarify intentions, and bridge distances that the avoidant is unwilling or unable to cross. This dynamic can lead to exhaustion, frustration, and the erosion of self-worth. When the empath practices detachment, they withdraw from this exhausting cycle, no longer allowing their energy to be consumed by patterns they cannot change. Silence becomes the conduit of freedom, both for the empath and for the avoidant, for it is in this quiet space that authentic awareness can emerge. The empath is free because they are no longer entangled in the avoidance, and the avoidant is offered a rare opportunity to meet themselves without interference. Detachment also carries a profound teaching for the avoidant. It is a lesson in accountability, presence, and the consequences of avoidance. When the super empath stops explaining, stops pursuing, and stops validating avoidance, the avoidant is confronted with the emptiness left in the absence of what they once took for granted. This confrontation is not punishment, it is illumination. The avoidant begins to see the full weight of their choices, the limits of their patterns, and the reality that authentic connection requires engagement, vulnerability, and honesty. In detachment, love is preserved without compromise. Boundaries are respected without guilt, and the empath demonstrates that presence and care are not infinite resources to be exhausted at will. Furthermore, detachment is an expression of trust in the universe and divine timing. The super empath recognizes that forcing understanding, reaction, or change is contrary to the natural flow of growth. Transformation must come from within the avoidant, and it will only occur when they are ready to face themselves honestly. By detaching, the empath allows this process to unfold naturally, trusting that absence, silence, and the consequences of avoidance will awaken awareness in their own time. This is the divine rhythm at work. Love held with integrity creates space for growth, while chasing or over-explaining only delays awakening. Detachment also brings profound inner peace to the super empath. When one releases the need to control, to justify, or to overgive, a sense of liberation emerges. Energy that was once tied to endless pursuit is now available for self-nurture, reflection, and purposeful action. This freedom is sacred. It is not a withdrawal of care, but a reorientation toward balance, self-respect, and alignment with truth. The empath demonstrates that love does not require self-sacrifice at the expense of well-being, and that healthy boundaries are an essential part of any conscious relationship. Ultimately, freedom through detachment is the highest lesson the super empath can offer. It is the recognition that love and care are sacred forces, not tools for chasing, correcting, or rescuing. It teaches that authentic connection arises only when both parties engage fully and consciously. Silence and detachment are not signs of abandonment. They are expressions of integrity, wisdom, and divine love. In this sacred space, the avoidant has the opportunity to awaken, to take responsibility for their patterns, and to meet the super empath as an equal in presence, authenticity, and emotional truth. The empath, in detaching, not only protects and honors themselves, but also becomes a vessel through which transformation, accountability, and growth can flow freely. It is in this space of detachment that true freedom emerges. Freedom for the empath, freedom for the avoidant, and freedom for the love that exists between them to either rise into authenticity or fall away in clarity. Thank you for allowing me to share these insights with you. May they guide and empower your journey. Goodbye for now, and may your path be filled with clarity, strength, and transformative love.